this time. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. I guess we are still starting these meetings off with a roll call just to see if everyone is here. So I will go ahead and call the roll. Let me know if you're present or absent. Chair is present. Commissioner Phillips?
Present.
Commissioner Drazen has officially resigned the commission. For those of you who don't know, she's been very busy with other things in her life, and we'll get an update on filling those spots later. Commissioner Lopes?
Here.
Commissioner Murphy?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Schroeder is absent. Commissioner Stevens?
Here.
And Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So we always start these meetings off with an opportunity for public comment on anything that is not on our agenda. So we'll obviously be talking about the City of Sandy a little bit later tonight, but if there's anyone here who would like to address the commission for another reason, you're welcome to do that. And I'm not seeing anyone. So with that, we will move into our public hearing. And forgive me, I have a script to read. Every time I don't read this, I go off track and I get myself in trouble, so we're going to read through it tonight. The public hearing is now open for the consideration of Z0004-20-CP, a legislative proposal to amend the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan map to include a proposed expansion of the City of Sandy's urban growth boundary. The Planning Commission is charged with making a recommendation on the application to the Board of County Commissioners. The record from this hearing will be forwarded to the board, which will make the final decision on this matter. The board will conduct another hearing on this application on Wednesday, March 18th at 9:30 a.m. That hearing will be de novo, meaning that the hearing will be started anew and additional testimony may be offered. Tonight's hearing will not go beyond 10 o'clock p.m. Hopefully it won't take that long. If not concluded, it will be continued to a date and time certain. The hearing may be continued for other reasons as well. If an announcement of an additional hearing date and time is made tonight, it will be the only notice given of that additional hearing. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, the Planning and Zoning Division will give a staff report. We'll have entry into the record of any additional correspondence received. We will receive technical information from other government agencies, testimony by representatives of recognized community planning organizations, hamlets, and villages, testimony by any other person with a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker. I don't think we'll have an issue with that tonight. Closing of the public hearing, and then the Planning Commission discusses and takes action. If you wish to speak tonight, please fill out a testimony form. I know I've got a couple right here, and submit to our administrative assistant, Darcy. Please, when you come to the table, please state your name and where you are from, or who you are representing for the record when you come to the testimony table. Thank you. So with that, I think we can move into the staff report. Glenn, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Commission. Glenn Hamburg, Senior Planner with the County's Planning and Zoning Division. This is in the matter of file Z0004-20-CP. It's a proposed expansion of the City of Sandy's urban growth boundary by approximately 6.42 acres. While the application is supported by the City of Sandy, indeed they have done their part to approve it, as I'll explain, the applicant's actually a private party, Allied Homes and Development. The owners of the subject tax lot, which is a portion of the area included in the expansion area, are those listed on the screen, the Pollins and Miss Tenike. The subject property does not have any situs address, but it's largely tax lot 701 of tax map 24E23, as I'll show you. Right now, the property is under the county's jurisdiction, and it's zoned exclusive farm use. However, it's inside of the city's urban reserve area, the URA. So it's an area that's already planned for future urbanization, despite its current zoning. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of an outline of my presentation. I will explain the application and how it demonstrates a need for particular public facilities. I'll explain how the expansion area, while intended to be zoned residential, at least a portion of it, if and when it's brought into the city, it's not proposed for any particular housing development itself. And as I mentioned, it's already inside of an urban reserve area. The place is sort of first priority for inclusion in the UGB when it's necessary. Then after that, we'll take a brief look at some of the most substantive approval criteria. And then I'll mention the staff's recommendation, which is for the Planning Commission to recommend approval with 2 conditions. And there's a typo in the staff report that says 3, but then there's just 2 that follows. So there's just 2 recommended conditions. Briefly, I wanted to show you this map, and there's a copy of it as an exhibit and in the staff report. But this is a page out of the City of Sandy's adopted transportation system plan. Note that the urban growth boundary depicted on this map is not current. I'll show you a map that has current boundaries on it. But the map shows this particular road, this dotted blue line, as a needed public facility at some point in the future. It's Gunderson Road. And we'll take a look at some maps that focus on just this area here. So the city has identified, though, a need at some point for a road, specifically a minor arterial, in roughly this location. The map clarifies that this is just a planning level illustration, so it's not necessarily the precise location of future roads, but generally where they ought to be. Here's a more detailed map of that close-up area. And if you can see here, in pink is that Gunderson Road extension that's in the TSP. And then the edge of that crosshatched area is the boundary of the existing UGB. You can see that there's this tiny little portion that connects with the green line. That's Highway 211. It kind of makes this jog down to connect, again in this planning level illustration of the TSP. However, some engineers have looked at this and they found that this particular alignment is problematic because it presents sight distance challenges. There's super elevated portions of the road to go around a curve. It's just not a safe location for an actual road connection to the highway. The road is needed, but not in this particular location and alignment. The city has also attested to there being a need for a public park. Generally in this area that I've shaded, this is my map, not the city's or the applicant's depiction, but this is sort of what they've expressed. A need for a public park on the north side of Highway 211 and in the area to serve future residential development. That yellow space is in the city's comprehensive plan for future housing development. And there's an interest in having a park there. There's already a park nearby, but it's on the south side of 211, so people can't easily cross it. Now, the transportation engineers have looked at alternative locations for the Gunderson Road alignment, and they show that this kind of particular location would be the nearest suitable location, the nearest suitable alternative. In the construction of this road and in service of this road, there'll be a need for stormwater facilities, this blue little blocks that I'll show on some close-up maps. And because this area would create a negative space between the road and the UGB, there's a proposal to include the park in that green location. Now we need to consider a UGB expansion because this road serving urban development as well as the stormwater facilities in this park, cannot be located outside of an urban growth boundary outright on EFU land. There had been considerations of what's called a goal exception, where you could provide these public facilities on EFU land without being inside city limits, but for various reasons that wasn't possible. So in order to provide these urban services, a road connection, a public park, and these public stormwater facilities, it needs to be annexed into the city. And the first step to doing that is to expand the urban growth boundary. Expanding the urban growth boundary just makes the area eligible for annexation and rezoning by the city. So these public facilities would be located here, and the urban growth boundary is proposed to be expanded as illustrated in this red outlined shape that we'll close in at. It includes the Gunderson Road connection, the park, the stormwater facilities, and a section of 211 that would potentially need to be widened for a turn lane, etc. Here, though, briefly, is just a satellite image of the area. So this shows in orange the boundary, the existing urban growth boundary, and what's inside of it is to the right, to the east. And then there's tax lot 701 that would have the proposed road connection cross it. This would be roughly where the stormwater facility is in relation to the highway, and this would be where the park is. So it's those facilities that would need to be included in the expanded urban growth boundary, and then annexed in and rezoned by the city in order for them to actually be constructed. None of that could happen until it's annexed and rezoned by the city.
Glenn, is that a creek to the left of the blue?
There is some evidence of running water out there. I don't know if it's a perennial stream, but there's also evidence of there being some wetlands on the northwest of tax lot 701. That's not something that's regulated by the county, and it might not be regulated by the city either. Wetlands are typically regulated at the state level, but they've been notified of this and have made comment on the application. So these are the facilities, and then this is the applicant's map of the particular facilities in the expansion area. So we have the Gunderson Road connection itself. That right-of-way is roughly an acre. There's the stormwater facility, that's roughly 0.7 acres. There's the park and some adjacent easements for another 2.38. And the rest of it would be the improved portions of Highway 211 and easements along the highway for a total of approximately 6.42 acres. Now, the applicant and the city agree that this area, once annexed in and rezoned, would only be developed with these particular public facilities. Even if some of the property were to be rezoned for residential use, no houses would actually be constructed in it. As I understand it, I don't want to speak for the city's code. As I understand it, there is no zone of the city that is just for public facilities. So they have to zone it something else when they annex it in. They propose for the park land to be zoned parks and open space, and then the remainder of it to be zoned residential, which is the same zoning district adjacent to planned development. Despite those zonings, only these public facilities would be constructed, according to the applicant and to the city. And staff's recommended conditions of approval, which the applicant has agreed to, would specifically restrict the expansion area to these uses. And the applicant's statements about this and the city's adopted ordinance that speaks to this are exhibits 23 and 25, which I passed out just now. I noted that the expansion area is inside of this urban reserve area. The urban reserve boundary of the city is this one at the extent here, and then the expansion area is here in yellow. So again, this is already space that's at least intended in the long term to be urbanized when the need comes. A little bit about applicable statewide planning goals. I won't go through all of them. One of them is Goal 5. This is the goal for natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces. I noted in the staff report that there is a designated Goal 5 resource on the property, on tax lot 701. There's a section of the Barlow Road. It's a third priority section, and at least in aerials that I've seen and the ones that we looked at here, there doesn't appear to be any ruts or signs of it, but we have it mapped, and it's officially inventoried by the county. So it's something that we recognize as a historic resource, but the implementing protections in the ZDO are pretty thin. Indeed, for these third priority segments, there's not really much in terms of land use protections that would necessarily prohibit the construction of a road over the Barlow Road if it was inside of the county's jurisdiction. In any case, the city will be the one to evaluate necessary protections for this road if and when it annexes in the territory and rezones it. So all we're doing in this application is considering whether to make the space eligible for annexation and rezoning by the city. And if and when there's an application to annex and rezone this expansion area at the city level, they would evaluate Goal 5 and decide whether or not it's necessary to apply any restrictions to development. Now, all that said, the applicant has noted in the record that they are working to minimize the impacts to the Barlow Road. There is this demonstrated need for a public road there, and so maybe it's the case that we need to allow the road, or the city will need to allow the road, but there's measures they can do to not overdevelop their project. We looked at Goal 10, that's the housing goal. We found that there isn't a need to do a housing needs analysis for this urban growth boundary expansion, even though they're proposing to maybe zone it residential, because of the restriction on housing. We found that we don't need them to show that there's a need for housing to do this because they're not proposing to build any houses at all. Goal 11, public facilities. By allowing this urban growth boundary expansion, we would make it possible for the construction of this needed public facility. And I've noted several times it's a demonstrated need. It's a need that's shown in the transportation system plan, but others have attested to the need for this road connection recently as well. In the record, the Sandy Fire District points out that this road connection will serve as a secondary outlet to existing residential homes and could help to decrease response times. We've heard from members of the public, and I've attended meetings at the City of Sandy where area residents are very interested in having this road connection so that planned housing development doesn't necessarily all funnel through their neighborhoods. So staff found that it will serve a demonstrated need. Goal 12 asks us to look at transportation and to plan for transportation. Again, already this road is planned for in the city's TSP. Staff, as well as traffic engineers who've done traffic studies in the record, showed that this connection would be safer and more convenient than what's there now or what's even planned for in the TSP. And the traffic study in the record has the formal transportation planning rule, the TPR findings. And those findings show that this proposal will not have a, quote, significant effect on existing transportation systems in a negative sense. Indeed, it might improve them. Lastly, Goal 14 about urbanization. I've already noted that the area is inside of an urban reserve area, an area prioritized for eventual urban uses. Goal 14 is largely implemented by Chapter 660, Division 24 OARs that are listed here. Here are some of the most substantive ones that we looked at in the staff report. Firstly, we found that this proposal is consistent with applicable OARs in the sense that it was properly initiated by the city. This isn't something that the county goes out and initiates to expand a city's urban growth boundary. It needs to be initiated by the city. And they did that by advertising and holding public hearings. Indeed, they adopted or they approved the urban growth boundary at a meeting just last week. But the county also needs to approve it. They have also properly demonstrated that there's a need for certain public facilities. These are the road connection, the associated stormwater facilities, and a park broadly on the north side of Highway 211. They have done this inventory of where it would be possible to provide these services, and they have found that the existing urban growth boundaries, as we saw on the map, wouldn't allow them to provide these public services. It wouldn't make sense to expand the urban growth boundary on another side of town to provide a park in this location, for example. wouldn't it make sense to expand it elsewhere to provide a highway connection for Gunderson Road? It can only go right here. So the only suitable location. So staff found that it meets the applicable regulations of the state. Staff found that the application is also consistent with the county's comprehensive plan. So, for example, it doesn't propose any changes to the county's citizen involvement program. The public noticing of this application was done according to the implementing rules in ZDO section 1307. Staff found that the expansion, again, is needed, and that it would be into an area that's an urban reserve, not a rural reserve, as precluded by Chapter 4. This review of the application has been properly coordinated with the city, and as I mentioned, has been initiated by the city. And then we've also notified other agencies. We did more than notify ODOT. They are one of the property owners, and they signed the application, so thereby agreeing to it. We also notified DSL about those wetlands, and their responses are in the record. And again, we've noticed property owners according to the requirements of 1307. So staff's recommendation, as noted in the staff report, is for the Planning Commission to recommend approval to the by the board at its upcoming public hearing, subject to two specific conditions. One is just that the expansion would be the 6.41, 6.42 acres roughly requested in their maps, and that there be a restriction that the expansion area could only be used for the proposed public facilities. That concludes my presentation.
Questions for Glenn?
Glenn, is there a timeline that this must go in prior to the subdivision?
Well, it's, and the city could speak to that if they want to, if they're here tonight. It's my understanding that this urban growth boundary expansion is not specifically necessary for any current development. Rather, there's this broader need to put this road in at some point. There are approved subdivisions in the area. There are those that are already built out, and there are those that could come any time because of adjacent areas already incorporated into city limits. So it's my understanding that the applicant is pursuing this expansion regardless of the timing of any other development. However, there is a 100-lot subdivision that was just approved by the city, and I'm going to back up to a map to show. Here, so just north of the park, the green space, in this rectangle, the city has approved a 100-lot subdivision. Now, the subdivision can proceed without the connection provided for, or without the UGB expansion. That's my understanding. However, as we look at this, it would no doubt benefit that subdivision because it would provide a secondary access for those residents.
While we're on,
Oh, go ahead.
is that follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead with follow-up, this is something different.
Follow-up would be, so construction of this 100-lot subdivision would have to come through an existing neighborhood, through residential streets and not a feeder.
Unless the urban growth boundary were to be expanded and the property would be annexed and rezoned by the city before the road before the construction of the subdivision. It might be the case that if this gets all approved in time, they could build the road connection from the highway and construct the subdivision with access directly from the highway.
Utility right-of-way that I read about was accompanying this, this right-of-way. Would the utility right-of-way have to be in place first prior for this 100-lot subdivision?
I don't believe that any of these facilities would need to be in place for that 100-lot subdivision to proceed. I believe that the city's conditions of approval on the subdivision would allow it to be constructed with or without this expansion. But it would benefit that subdivision as well as other future subdivisions in that area.
Thank you.
Can you go back?
Yeah.
Can you briefly speak to the proposed park? It is basically maybe left over from the new alignment of Gunderson Road, and so it's, okay, let's call it a park. Can you speak to if there's any discussion in the applications or at the City of Sandy about if that is the right location for a park for that area? Somewhere in the staff report, it said there wasn't going to be needed sewer or other facilities, water to the park. At what point would that actually be developed as a usable park?
I don't have any information about that. Indeed, as much as I've heard from the city is that it's the city's interest and their Parks and Rec Committee's interest in order to have a park in this location. And in the public hearings on that adjacent 100-lot subdivision, neighbors attested to a general need for a park. And this park might be only planned to the extent that we've heard of a need for a park, and this is some sort of negative space where that could be efficiently accommodated. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any plans for any particular park improvements or what features the park might include.
Okay. I also have some questions on the Barlow Trail. You said it is a third priority segment, but do you know of any other cases like this where there was such a segment and how it's normally treated with the road? It is a significant resource. It's a designated Goal 5, even if it's only inventoried at the county level. Can
Yeah.
you speak to that at all?
I don't know of any other instances when a road has been constructed over the Barlow Road and what measures were taken to minimize it, other than to know that there are sections of the Barlow Road that are covered by roads today. But anew, I don't know what measures might have been considered in similar cases to say, for example, you need to take measure X, Y, and Z to minimize impacts. And I don't know if the planning director has either. Ultimately, though, what protections there should be to it would be up to the city of Sandy if they were to annex it in. That community would decide what priority it has and what sort of regulations they might have on development over it.
Would that be at time of annexation?
Yep.
Okay. And so what recourse is left to us? There was the suggested condition of approval to minimize impacts, but that wasn't
Yeah.
included in your recommendation.
And that's because staff couldn't see what minimizing impacts necessarily would mean when we would be specifically approving only these public facility improvements. We wouldn't allow them to do any more than they've asked for, and what they've asked for is just what there's a demonstrated need for. So what minimizing impacts would be in the construction of this particular needed road, associated stormwater facilities in the park, I'm not sure. So that's why staff didn't recommend it as a condition. And I don't see how it's necessarily needed to satisfy any of the approval criteria for just moving the boundary.
I would think some of that could involve something along the lines of where construction staging is located, making sure that's not on the road area, stuff like that. So there probably are actions that can be taken to minimize it. I was just hoping there was something stronger that we could do.
Yeah, the Planning Commission is certainly able to recommend those conditions, and those might be appropriate. But it might be the case that the staging of construction supplies is only allowed in the urban growth boundary expansion area anyway. It couldn't be staged in the EFU portion left out of the city of Sandy. So all of the staging would occur in the area already to be improved and disturbed.
Or potentially on the parkland where it might not need to be disturbed.
That's true. Maybe a thought is there could be encouragement or recognition of the road at the park. Preservation of any visible ruts that are at the park, perhaps. But ultimately, it would be up for something that the city of Sandy would have to apply.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I'm kind of interested in, curious, about this stormwater facility. If this doesn't go through and they don't put a stormwater facility there, what would be the impact on the community? Is that a vital piece of this?
I wouldn't be able to answer that, but the applicant might, and their representative is here.
Other questions?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious why it's, if you're gonna put it, annex it into the urban growth boundary, why would you put a restriction on not putting houses there, even if they don't wanna, maybe it's for the future, but why would you put that restriction on there when you're gonna build houses right across the street?
That's a really good question, and the answer is partly that there has not been the state-required analysis to expand the urban growth boundary to allow for housing. If you're expanding an urban growth boundary to provide more land for housing, you have to do a really robust analysis of the need for that. And the city just expanded their urban growth boundary in 2017 to provide for more housing. They have not done that analysis, and anew for 6+ more acres of housing. So that's one reason. If they had done an analysis and found that their 20-year plan for their 20-year capacity of housing lands is inadequate, they would also need to show why expanding it here is appropriate versus other corners of the community. They've not done that analysis. So the recommendation of DLCD is that if you apply this restriction, you can avoid the regulatory need to do any of that analysis despite the proposed residential zoning.
Other questions? Okay, so we need to do a couple pieces of quick housekeeping. Glenn, we have 15 exhibits here. Are there any correspondence for the record that we should be aware of?
There should be a total of 25 exhibits, 3 that I just handed out this evening, as well as an updated exhibits list. And that would be it. The additional exhibits that were not included with the packet that have come in subsequently are a letter dated March 5th from the applicant, a copy of a PowerPoint presentation that the applicant might give, and then finally a copy of the approval of this expansion by the City of Sandy and their associated findings.
Great, thank you. Along those lines, I know that we have the City of Sandy here tonight. Are there any other government agencies that have provided technical information?
I think we have an error in the script. So this actually is an application that has an applicant, and so they actually get to go next.
Yeah,
I'm
that's,
thinking
I was actually
I
gonna
think
move
maybe
that
that's
way.
not in there.
Yeah, it's not in there, but I was gonna move directly there first, so. Excellent. So we have all of the correspondence. So with that, we'll move to the applicant, and then we'll bring in the City of Sandy and go from there. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair Pasco. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael C. Robinson. I'm a land use attorney with the firm of Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland 97204. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant. With me is Marie Holliday. Marie is with AKS Engineering and Forestry. AKS is handling the planning and civil engineering for the application. We have 2 other folks here tonight also. Rand Walton sitting to my left. Rand, the civil engineer with AKS. He can help us answer questions if you have them about civil engineering. Marie's the planner. And then behind me is Jessica Ehart. Jessica is with the transportation engineering firm of Lancaster Mobley. They did the transportation analysis that Glenn referred to. So Jessica's here to answer questions about Goal 12 or statewide transportation planning rule or anything related to transportation. So our presentation tonight is going to be divided into 2 parts. I'd initially said, or planned to say I have a short presentation, but I'd like to answer some of your questions, so it may make it a bit longer, but nevertheless, my presentation should be relatively short. And then Marie's going to follow me and talk about the application in more detail, but fortunately Glenn did a very good job of explaining the application. I think he's covered a number of the things that we would have said. Let me say one thing. This is not a quasi-judicial hearing, apparently. So we don't have an opportunity for rebuttal. So I would ask, if you have questions, please ask us those before you close your hearing, because normally in rebuttal, we'd have an opportunity perhaps to have an additional conversation with you or to respond to testimony, but if it's legislative, we don't have that ability, and so I would ask you as commission members, if you have questions, please ask us questions so we can answer them. That's really why we're here tonight.
It might be a quasi judicial hearing.
It is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think what we
I
have.
thought it was too, but
I
you
think
said
we have the
legislative.
wrong script in front
Yes,
of the
you
chair's
have,
office.
you do have the wrong script, but that's okay. We'll roll
So it
with
is a
it.
quasi-judicial hearing, and
Right.
so the applicant will speak, and then at the end, they will have an opportunity to rebut if they wish
But
to.
I love to hear more opportunity to talk. So. But I'd still say, please ask us questions. Really, we're here not just to make our case that we've met our legal burden of proof, but we're here to answer your questions. And to the extent folks testify, we want to respond honestly and fairly to them. Let me, though, start with some of the questions you asked, because I thought they were perceptive and worth asking. And in addition to Glenn's good answers, I'll offer some of my own. And Marie may have some answers as well. So, Commissioner, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to get a pair of glasses so I can actually see your name, but I haven't gotten them yet. Commissioner Murphy, you asked about the timing of the road versus the subdivision. Without turning this into a subdivision hearing, which is not what you're here for tonight, our plan is to have the road installed and constructed before the majority of houses go in. That's something that the Planning Commission recommended in their decision, and the City Council will consider it. But we don't have, and as I said, I don't want to turn this into a subdivision hearing, and I'm not interested in, and nor should you be interested in hearing my presentation about the requirements for the subdivision. Bottom line is, we don't have a legal obligation to build this road or to dedicate the land for a park. But we wanted to do it to be collaborative with the city and the neighbors, to try and find a solution. And I will say, I think land use, and I've been doing this as you have for a while, land use doesn't necessarily always offer us a chance to be collaborative and find solutions. A lot of times it's just adversarial position. But we wanted to try and find a way to provide the Gunderson Road extension. As Glenn said, where it's shown on the TSP map, it does not work. You can't put a minor arterial at a curve on a state highway because you won't be able to make the site distance requirements. And we met with the Oregon Department of Transportation several times and confirmed that we couldn't do that. So we've heard that the city and the neighbors want a second way in and out of not only our subdivision, but the subdivision in the north. As Glenn said, the road is on the city's acknowledged TSP. So we said, my client said he would apply for this UGD application to see if we could do that. So that's why we're here. And one of the conditions, Commissioner Murphy, that the Planning Commission adopted in its unanimous decision approving the subdivision was to require the road to be constructed before all of the dwellings are in. And we're fine with that. You also asked about utilities. All of the utilities serving the subdivision are going to come from the north. So they're going to come down from Melissa into our subdivision. Now, the road, of course, as you know, can have a provision for subdivision, for utilities rather, but our subdivision isn't going to have utilities coming from that direction. Our water, sanitary sewer lines are extended from the existing subdivision to the north, and that, as you are aware, is typically how it's done and how it's planned. So the bottom line is, our goal is to hopefully get a subdivision approval by the City Council, hopefully get a UGB approval, start constructing the subdivision, because we'd like to get it done in the next couple of years. But before we finish all the houses, and indeed before we can have certificate of occupancy for more than the majority of the houses, we have to have the road. And that, we've committed to doing that. We're working on a development agreement with the city, and that's in the development agreement as well. So we have no problem with doing that. But construction traffic is going to come from the north. The utilities are going to come from the north. We have pledged to do everything we can to minimize construction impacts on a subdivision. There's no denying when you bring construction traffic through an existing subdivision, it's just going to have impacts. But you can do things such as follow the city's requirements for hours of construction. You can keep the street clean. You can have flaggers. You can do a number of things to assure that it doesn't impact that neighborhood more than it has to. And we've committed to doing that, and the city expects us to do that, and we will. So those were your questions. Commissioner Phillips, you asked a couple of questions about the park and Barlow Road. So after the first Planning Commission hearing, where, as Glenn said, a number of the neighbors testified and said they wanted a parking hearing, and we can't provide it in our subdivision. We've had that discussion in the city. I didn't do it. The client the applicant looked at the map and said, we've got this area. It's actually about twice as big as you might ordinarily get if you dedicated parkland through the city's procedure. I call it a donut hole because if you didn't include it in UGB, you're going to have this little area of isolated non-UGB land. And so our client said, let's include that in the application. He has to buy that land. It's not a free thing. He has to purchase it. He's prepared to do it. And he amended the UGB application to include the park. Now, if we were developing a park anywhere, either in our subdivision or on this land, there's not an obligation under the code to do park improvements. You either make a payment in lieu of dedicating land, or you dedicate the land. And here, what we propose to do, and again, without turning this into a City of Sandy subdivision hearing, we've said we're going to do two things in the alternative. If the UGB is approved, we're going to provide that parkland to the city. So I think it's just over 2 acres. That becomes acreage the city can develop in the future as they see fit, figure out what they want it to look like. If for some reason the UGB isn't approved, then we'll make a fee and lieu payment to the city for park. There won't be a park area in our subdivision, but they can take our fee and lieu payment, and I forget the precise amount, so since I can't remember, I won't tell you. I won't guess. How much is it? $310,000. Yeah, thank you, Marie. She didn't guess, she knows. We'll make a fee and lieu payment to the city. But it's our preference to give the city land in that area because we've heard testimony from the neighbors that they'd like a park in the area. So, it's not as though it's free for us. And, it probably is a good description. It's leftover land, but it's in that area on this side of the highway. It's near the residences. You'll have access from the subdivision via Gunderson Road. So it's accessible to the neighborhoods. It'll be available for the city. So it's our plan to try and provide that area for the city to develop as a future park. You also asked Commissioner Phillips about Barlow Road. So there is no, well, let me back up and say it this way. I've had that discussion with Glenn. We recognize, even though it's a third-tier segment, we recognize the importance of Barlow Road. And the city's comprehensive plan, for example, doesn't have precise requirements for how one addresses a segment of Barlow Road, but it acknowledges it. So we said in our letter, and I think our proposed condition is quoted in the staff report to the commission, we understand we need to think about it. And we have said we'll coordinate with the city and the county as necessary, although this won't be in county land anymore if it's annexed, about how to treat that road. We can do everything from get an historic expert about how one should memorialize the road. I think your suggestion about where staging activity occurs is a thoughtful one. I don't know, frankly, if that works, but I don't see any reason the applicant wouldn't consider generally if there's another place to stage materials and construction activity, we'll do it off the road. I think that makes sense, and that's a logical condition to me. But I think the important point is we appreciated Glenn mentioning Barlow Road to us, and we have agreed that if and when we get to the annexation and development stage for the road, then we'll consider Barlow Road and we'll work with the city on how to best memorialize it or protect it or minimize impact. When we were talking, I think you asked Ms. Hughes about other examples in the county. I leaned over and asked Marie, because AKS does a lot of subdivisions in Clackamas County, are there other examples? And I think Marie or Rand can give those to you if you want them, where roads cross Barlow Trail. And then Commissioner Wilson, you asked about the stormwater pond. Could you go back to the slide from the stormwater pond? Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention something, and if I get it wrong, Marie or Rand can give you the right answer, but I think I'm going to get this right. So the reason we're doing the stormwater pond, as you know, is when you develop an urban facility like a road, you have to take account of the stormwater that runs off. This is not for our subdivision. It's not for any residential development. It's for the road improvements. And so you have to, it's an urban facility. As Glenn said, you can't do urban facilities outside of the boundary. You have to include them in the boundary expansion that we proposed. So we've included this area to address it. I can guarantee you, again, without being too speculative, when the subdivision is approved and when the road is approved, we'll construct the stormwater pond. So it won't be an area that won't be developed. And it's hard to see on this map, but if you look at the very top, that's the closest area of urban development in the city right now. It's a long way from the stormwater pond. But we have to have the stormwater pond to handle the stormwater runoff from the road, so that's why it's shown from this list. Did that answer your question about that? Okay.
So it's vital to have that pond for the road?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the stormwater facility is sized for the amount of impervious surface that the road will create, so it's necessary in building.
Are there any included improvements on Highway 211? Or is that just the storm route that's included?
We'll have, in the right-of-way, we'll have some improvements because you'll need turn lanes, and we'll have some, I don't think I can describe everything, but you've got to do some turn lanes, you're going to have to do some guardrails, there'll be some retaining walls. But all of that is in an existing right-of-way that's going to be in the boundary, so we shouldn't have any problem doing that. And I'm sorry, I'll just say one other thing might be helpful too. AKS has done an engineering analysis of what's necessary to do this road improvement, and that's how we got the UGB boundary that's before you.
And the location of the stormwater pond, is any of that on the Barlow Road?
I don't know, I'm guessing probably. It looks like it crosses it.
So for storm retention, that would definitely be a lot of ground disturbance there.
I couldn't hear you.
So stormwater retention, that would definitely include a lot of ground disturbance there.
It depends, that's a big area. It depends on how you do it and where you site it. I think your statement is generally correct, but I think it depends on a particular plan. If you have a suggestion about how we might address that with respect to Barlow Road, we're certainly open to hearing it.
I'd have to see a lot of engineering reports, so not at this time.
Okay. So, I did more than I had intended to do, and I appreciate your listening to me. And again, if you have questions, please ask them. I had 4 points I wanted to make, and then I'll turn it over to Murray. So, we agree with the county staff report recommending approval. We appreciate the fact that both the Planning Commission for the City of Sandy and the City Council unanimously approved the UGB. That was very much appreciated. I think Glenn's done a very good job of articulating this area, but I just wanted to emphasize 2 points. First of all, as Glenn said, this area is in the city's acknowledged urban reserve area. So urban reserve areas are first priority areas for expansion of UGBs. It's not an area that's intended to remain outside of the UGB forever. It is outside of the UGB now, but it's urban reserve. It's intended to accommodate this area, as Glenn said. Our application, secondly, is expressly for these 2 public facilities. We have no intention of doing residential development. That's why we added the commitment to both the county and the city that only the public facilities would be constructed, the road facility and the area for parkland dedication. And lastly, and I think we've already covered this somewhat obliquely, but I'll just be direct about it. As I said earlier, we're not required to do these things for subdivision approval. I recognize there's a difference of opinion if you were to look at the hearings for the City of Sandy. But we wanted to try and do the right thing. We wanted to collaborate with the city about how do we provide these public facilities. That's why we're here with you. So for those reasons, we hope at the end of your hearing tonight that you will recommend approval to your board of the UGB expansion. I think it's 6.42 acres. And as Glenn has said, and we'll say expressly on the record, it's only for the 2 public facilities. So thank you for your time. I'll stop talking. I'll turn it over to Marie, and then we'll be back at rebuttal.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all again for your time this evening. Glenn prepared a very extensive presentation, so forgive the repetition.
I'm sorry. It's cycling through.
Again, my name is Marie Holiday. I'm a land use planner with AKS Engineering. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. This is just a slide of our project team, so all the consultants involved in this, so you can see that it's been a pretty large collaborative effort, as well as extensive conversations, at the city and county level with analysis. So just wanted to go ahead and put that up there for a moment. And then just jumping right in, again, this application came about because of the Bailey Meadows subdivision application, but it is a standalone application. It's located in the southwest area of the city and north of Highway 211 there. Again, the expansion is 6.42 acres, and it's only for needed public facilities. And I'll go ahead and show you a breakdown of that in a moment. If you can see there on the screen, the blue line kind of disappears a bit, but just north is the UGB line and this the city limits. And all of that area north is zoned the single-family residential, and again, that's where we pulled that zoning to zone the road, even though it will only be developed as a public facility. East is Clackamas County Zone RRFF5, as well as EF. So here's a snapshot of the City of Sandy's TSP, and you can again see Mike was describing the urban reserve area, so we are within that green boundary, first land to be annexed, and then you can see that dotted line that comes across is again Gunderson Road. But for many reasons, you know, the alignment doesn't work and it's outside of the UGB, so those are the issues that we ran into thus far. And so there's a vicinity map again showing the UGB line and the city limits. And then there's that 6.42 acre amendment area pulled out. So you can see the shape kind of follows. That long tail is going to be ODOT right of way. If you go to the next slide there, we have these all broken out. So we're in the process of working with the city currently to amend our annexation application to change that parkland to have a public open space designation. But the rest of that will all still be zoned SFR. And so you can see the breakdown goes through. The areas don't add up to the 6.42 acres because 2 of those are actually easements overlapping on the parkland area. But the rest of the amendment area is really all for those specific uses to be incorporated. So they have their acreages listed in. And so if you have any more questions following up, again, this was a standalone application, but the record is very large. And we have some civil engineering plans here we can discuss in greater detail any of the stormwater facility or any of the acreage if you have any questions on that.
Thank you. Any questions for Michael or Marie?
No.
Seeing none.
I've got one.
Just one?
It's more out of curiosity. The alignment of that road is kind of interesting, how it curves and it makes a right turn. And what's the rationale behind that alignment? It would seem like it would have been more of an arc that connects directly into that, into the highway. So I'm just curious why it's aligned the way it is.
Sure, I mean, I'm sure Rand could talk a little more specifically.
I'll sit down and take my seat.
Thank you.
Rand Wall, AKS Engineering, 12965 Southwest Herman Road, Suite 100, Portland, Oregon 97062. Were you asking about the original alignment that was in the TSP or the?
Well, the alignment, when you look at how the breakout and how it's dedicated, the alignment of the road, I'm looking at it.
It's the same.
Same one?
Yeah. Sure. This would be the road alignment, correct?
Yes.
So I'm curious as to why it doesn't just go straight into the road as opposed to having this right turn and then another turn. It just seemed odd.
The reason is because if you look at the property, it's kind of hard to plan, but the north line of the property underneath where it says exhibit map is where the road in the TSP is supposed to line up with that property line, that east-west, yes, that one. And so it's supposed to parallel that line and then pull away from the property.
I see.
And then, so you got to kind of slowly transition back into a perpendicular intersection with Highway 211.
Okay, I got it now.
Excellent.
Any other questions about stormwater facility or anything?
When you're southbound on 211, approaching this particular proposed right of way, I noticed today coming down here, because I have to drive past this, there's a berm that looks like visibility is limited as you're approaching this area. Will that be shaved down so you have more visibility in that particular area?
Yeah, there'll be a transition in there, and that was one of the reasons why the original TSP alignment didn't work out. I don't want to speak too much for the traffic consultant, but that berm gets steeper as you head north. Like if you're heading north, it gets steeper and steeper, and what that creates is a situation where you're kind of, it's difficult to see in both directions. And so this location here was at a point vertically where you could see further down each leg of the highway. And so, yeah, that was.
Excellent.
And one thing I wanted to mention about the Barlow Trail.
Yeah.
Okay.
How'd you guess?
Typically, the contractor, they'll set up on-site on the internal subdivision site. As Mr. Robinson mentioned, there's a home build-out point where the road will be required to be installed, right? And so the contractor will be mobilized on the interior side, and so likely their staging area will be on the interior portion of the subdivision site when we have to start building that road. And so, and additionally, that berm that we were just talking about, it doesn't make sense to, you can't really get into where we need to build the road because it drops down into the site where we need to build the road. It's gonna be a filled road. You gotta build it up to connect in. So my point is that it's not guaranteed, but contractors don't like to pick up their site and move it to another place, their staging areas, and so they'll probably work from the interior of the site since it's gonna be staged development.
And can you give just a little bit of logic for the location and sizing of the stormwater?
The stormwater facility, that is only meant to catch and treat the water from the widening of Highway 211 that's required for the turn lanes that we need to safely turn in and turn out of the site. And so what that requires is a widening of the road and then tapers heading north and south. It can't just abruptly end these widenings. And so that point there is the lowest point along the highway vertically. And so it's the only place that we can put it and get all of the water to the stormwater facility that is needed to be treated by jurisdictional rule. And so you can't put it higher, you can't put it lower, else we can't get the water to it.
And I'm guessing higher would be northeast on this map?
It would be northeast or southwest, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, it's kind of where it needs to be. It looks like from the map that you prepared in here, it looks like the Barlow Trail probably swings out a little bit in that section where you can see where it crosses the drainage, which this stormwater facility is near that drainage. Not in it, but close to it. And so it looks like that's the widest part where that trail swings out. That's any consolation. But that said, you notice that berm area, I'd be curious as to how much earthwork's already been done when the highway was constructed adjacent to the Barlow Trail. It's probably been impacted a little bit already.
Thank you.
Sure. One more question. When an sediment erosion plan is put in for the construction of this,
Yes.
I think that could probably be identified. You'd have to identify your staging areas within that plan, and you could identify the Barlow Trail as an historic site or a historic right-of-way and protect it on that particular plan, I would think.
Well, we could definitely designate the staging area away from that area, yeah. It's something we could work with the city.
I have another follow-on question, my earlier one. So if I understand that correctly, why wouldn't there be a public right-of-way along the north edge of the property to the west for the extension of Gunderson Road?
You mean from the TSP, how it goes in a straight line across the south boundary of the property?
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, the future Gunderson Road will be right along the edge of the property on the north side of the property, correct?
Yeah, if
south end of the property.
So the 100 lot subdivision would be up here,
Yeah.
and the TSP very basically illustrates it going like this, Gunderson Road.
Right, so the road would be in this property, wouldn't be in the new property, in the subdivision property, would be in this property.
Maybe half a street of Gunderson Road at the south end of the 100 lot subdivision,
Were there
or
any dedications for Gunderson as part of the subdivision?
I don't think there were.
So it would be part of the eventual development of this tax lot when it is annexed, presumably. So there weren't any designations for Gunderson as part of the subdivision?
Dedicating Gunderson is a condition of approval of this.
The east-west portion at the south line of the
Correct.
subdivision,
It's
that
on
was
the-
not.
It's on the southerly property, not on the
Okay.
northerly property.
Did that answer it, Tom?
So in other words, the initial construction of Gunderson Road is only going to will only just connect the subdivision to the highway.
That's correct. The applicant proposed to dedicate the right-of-way shown on the map, not any more right-of-way to the east.
Okay, so future extensions of Gunderson to the west, that'll be a whole new process then. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Other questions? I think we've exhausted them. Thank you. We'll see you guys back in a few minutes. 2 minutes? Yes.
Let's get you back on script correctly.
Yes, that would be helpful.
So maybe like a 2-minute break?
Yes, okay. Sure. So we're going to take a 2-minute break, apparently.
Okay. I couldn't get it. Okay. Yep. Yeah, but see, I didn't know where to show that.
Yeah. So we're going to do that, and then we'll move right into public testimony and go from there. So, testimony. If you wish to speak, please fill out a testimony form and submit it to the administrative assistant. Please state your name and where you're from. You've all heard that piece before. The criteria the Planning Commission must use in making its recommendation are listed in the notice given for the public hearing and will be identified when the oral staff report is presented. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or zoning and development ordinance which the person testifying believes to apply to the decision. Please relate any testimony to the identified criteria. Failure by any participant to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issues precludes appeal of the Land Use Board of Appeals on this issue. Failure by the applicant to raise a constitutional or other challenge to a proposed condition or of approval with sufficient specificity may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Make sure to raise any issues you have with the application at tonight's hearing to protect your right to appeal or challenge the county's final decision on this issue. The county's final decision may be appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. At this time, since we have a quasi-judicial hearing, I need to ask all the members of the Planning Commission to disclose any ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts of interest. Please indicate the nature and extent of any ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, and indicate whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing. Does any member of the audience, so does anyone have any biases and would like to disclose?
No.
I am seeing none. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any commissioner's impartiality? Welcome to do that. I see none. So with that, we can move back to the public testimony. Thanks everyone for your indulgence. I'm guessing that we don't have any CPOs, hamlets, or villages here tonight. Am I right about that? So with that, why don't we go ahead and bring up the city of Sandy? I think that's a good place to start, and then we'll move into the rest of the public testimony. I know we have Kelly O'Neill, is that correct? Welcome, thank you.
Commission. My name is Kelly O'Neill, 39250 Pioneer Boulevard, Sandy, Oregon 97055. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of city staff and also on behalf of the city council, since they voted 6-0 last week to approve an ordinance for UGB expansion. Before I go into that, I'd like to thank Glenn for working so hard on this, and also for Jennifer for participating as well and moving this along. It's an important issue that's been raised locally within the community of Sandy, and we're hoping for your recommended support of the UGB expansion to the Board of County Commissioners. So as I said, the city council approved an ordinance last Monday with a vote of 6-0. A few weeks prior to that, the city planning commission recommended approval to the city council with a vote of 6-0 as well. So all 12 hearing body members have all recommended approval. In 2017, I was before the planning commission, Clackamas County, right in this room, for our UGB expansion, which expanded the UGB in Sandy by over 600 acres. Unfortunately, when we did that expansion, we relied on the 2011 Transportation Systems Plan. And as Glenn and the applicant have both described very well tonight, it actually showed an alignment that was unfeasible. So going forward with our 2020 TSP plan that we're actually undertaking with ODOT right now, we're going to make sure that those alignments in the future actually are not just conceptual, but actually work, so that when we go forward with our next UGB expansion, we'll actually take in all the property necessary for those arterials and collectors that are slated to go outside of our current UGB lines. So it's kind of a hiccup, and I wish it wouldn't have happened just because we wouldn't even have to be here today. It would have been approved 3 years ago, but it is where we are now. Just to elaborate a little further, the Gunderson Road alignment will serve both the 100 lots to the north that Mr. Robinson spoke about. It will also serve more property to the north in the future. As you can see, kind of to the east of those tentative platted lots, there's a bunch of other property over there that, if it doesn't, it will eventually rely on roads to the east of there. But in the meantime, if those roads or those lands are not constructed, it would rely on Gunderson Road as well. So it is a road that potentially could be serving 200 plus lots in the next 5 to 10 years, in addition to the existing lots that are already within city limits to the north. A few points I just wanted to point out from conversation that's been happening. Gunderson Road west of the intersection with the subdivision, so that was just brought up. That would be brought in on tax lot 701 during a future UGB expansion. I would anticipate that we'll probably be doing another UGB expansion in 2020, 2026. With the passing of House Bill 2003 that you're probably aware of, the city of Sandy has to do their next housing and commercial and industrial inventorying in 2024. And if that identifies a deficit at that time, we would also bring in probably a portion of 701 to accommodate the future growth to the west. One of the reasons why it wasn't proposed with this application is because we were trying to bring in the least amount of area possible for Gunderson Road right away and what is needed in the immediate future. The other question about parkland development. So this park was identified as a potential, or this area was identified as a potential location for a park. I think it will be well suited for the future residents of the 100 lot subdivision to the north, and also for the existing residents north of that. How it works in the city of Sandy, and I think most parks development works this way as well around the state, is that we're currently undergoing a parks master plan update. Our last one was done in 1997. So that one will, if this UGB expansion is approved and it's annexed, would include this park, and then there would actually be an individual parks master plan for this park that would then actually decide what goes in the park, and at that time then the construction and development portions of that park would actually go forward. So you'd probably be looking at least 2 to 3 years from now before we even know what would be going into that parkland. The encouragement for not impacting the Barlow Road, I think it's a great idea. We'll work with the applicant to minimize that impact. And also, I think it is a good idea that, I think it was Glenn that brought it up, that if there's ruts or anything else in the identified parkland, I think it would be a cool feature of the park to somehow encapsulate those and keep them into the future. And then the only other thing I had, the stormwater facility has been brought up several times. It is the low point, and for the stormwater off of the highway to gravity feed down to it, it would have to be located in that location. So I don't think there's really an alternative location that we could cite that. And that pretty much concludes what I wanted to say. We really hope for you guys to recommend approval to the board, and thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. So at this point, we will move into general public testimony, starting with those in favor. I believe I have Aaron Fridley to speak. Findley. Do I have that right?
Erin
Oh,
Findley.
Thank you.
37616 Rachel Drive, Sandy, Oregon 97055. My house is on that map. So just above the proposed subdivision, there's a row of houses on Rachel that back to that subdivision that's been proposed. I'm speaking on behalf of several neighbors. There were more than 40 of us through written testimony and oral testimony that have been a part of this process at the city level. The park has been a big deal for our community. Safety has been the biggest deal for our community. If you look at the proposed subdivision along with our neighborhood, that's roughly 250 homes. And at this point, if this UGB was not approved, we will have one resident-controlled access out of our neighborhood going down a street that I'm about 4 houses away from, which is Melissa Avenue. So I am here tonight to ask that you consider what evacuation looks like without Gunderson Road for our residents, along with all the other considerations that have been brought up. It's not just about traffic. It's also about what happens if we have to evacuate opposite Melissa, because that is the wrong direction in an emergency for us to head in. So that is my one point for tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anything else?
Questions?
Excellent. I'm going to go off the script a little bit, just ask, is there anyone else here tonight that would wish to testify? I don't have any more cards. So with that, I think we can move to the rebuttal of the applicant. If you have anything else you would like to add?
Chair Pasco, members of the Planning Commission, Mike Robinson, again on behalf of the applicant. So I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Finley for taking your time to come out tonight. We appreciate the support. The only other thing I would add before you close the hearing and the record is, again, we've done everything we think we can do to work with the city and the neighbors to get Gunderson extended and get a park provided. We appreciate your comments about Barlow Road. We're amenable to a conditional approval or recommendation to the board, and that would require us to do what we can to minimize the impact. We think that is a reasonable approach. I would note though that you don't have any approval criteria before you that actually require preservation. That's all I have to say. I imagine, hope this hearing would have taken about 20 minutes, but it's taken a lot longer. But I appreciate your questions. We appreciate your listening to us, and we hope you do as both Ms. Finley and Mr. O'Neill said, recommend approval of this application to your board of county commission. If you have any questions, last opportunity, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Staff, do you all have any other additional information to add?
None, thank you.
You all might need to help me out a little bit. So we obviously don't need to continue this hearing, but do I need to do anything on the written record piece?
You can request if there's anyone in the audience who would like to keep the written record open.
Okay.
And if not, then you can close it.
Excellent. That's what I need. Would anyone in the audience like to keep the written record open? Seeing none, we can close the public hearing and move into deliberations by the Planning Commission. Would you like a couple minutes of break, or you just want to keep going through? Okay.
Push through.
That sounds great to me. Would anyone like to offer their thoughts? Do round robin, see where we're at.
I'm happy to dive in, you know I will.
Take it away, Mary.
I think it was a well put together application and staff report from Glenn, so thank you. It was pretty comprehensive. I obviously do have some concerns about Barlow Road. I think, Glenn, can you bring up your suggested conditions, your two?
Yeah.
I do like the inclusion of a condition of approval, just stating as the applicant requested, as written in the staff report, that the applicant shall consider the Barlow Road Historic Corridor and to minimize impacts by the extension of Gunderson Road, but including some of the things we've talked about as examples to give some parameters to what minimizing means. So something about including but not limited to the location of construction staging activities, excavation of the stormwater facility, and preservation of any apparent portions of the trail that are in that preserved parkland. I think that's really my main concern, and the rest seems pretty dialed in.
It sounds like you'll be working on a motion while we have testimony from others.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
I would
Other
just
thoughts?
mirror exactly what Mary said. I mean, I thought it was really well put together, reading through it, answered the vast majority of my questions, and then the rest of the questions took care of it. I think it's needed and well-planned, and I see that it was as a result of really an air back when they did the expansion, so it makes sense to me, and I'm supportive of this, and I really don't have any objections.
I had a question on most of our documentation. It mentions 6.42 acres, but this slide shows 6.41.
Yeah, it should be 6.42 plus or minus. So as worded in the staff report, it's 6.42 is the safe number to go with.
Other thoughts?
I'm good.
I am as well. Anything?
I would like to make a comment that
Go
I
ahead.
think it's very generous that a park is being offered for the number of lots that are put in, and I don't see a green space. I think this is an actual blessing that this area, this donut is actually there, so, yeah, I applaud you for it.
Yes, some of you have heard me say this before, but I live right on the the edge of Sandy, and I think that Sandy is an incredibly well-managed city that offers a lot of resources that beyond the city of Sandy itself. And I've always been really, it's interesting to see how much green space the city continues to build out for its residents. I think it's a great thing. I think the one concern that I have at all in this proposal is just this. It's a little weird that the whole residential zoning thing and, not allowing use, and how do we enforce that over a period of time, and what does that mean when the city wants to grow? The reality is there's just no way around it because of the limitations on Sandy's zoning code. But that's the one thing that just gives me a little bit of pause. But other than that, I think it's a great proposal. Would you like to make a motion?
I can make one if we're ready.
Did everybody talk?
Are we ready?
I
Everybody's good?
believe
Good.
so.
Okay.
I'm good.
Yeah, there's nothing that they want to add, so we're ready to move forward.
Okay, then I would move that we recommend approval of file number Z0004-20-CP based on the findings and recommendations in the March 2nd, 2020 staff report, including the two conditions, with an additional condition that the applicant shall consider the Barlow Road Historic Corridor and to minimize impacts by the extension of the Gunderson Road and the planned highway facilities, including but not limited to the location of construction staging activities, excavation of the stormwater facility, and preserving any portions of the road that are apparent in the parkland.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
It's going to be kind of vague on how they're going to minimize the impact because there's no specifics there.
Right.
So whatever they do is, well, we're minimizing.
Unfortunately, I think that's the
Best we can do.
Yep.
And then we can leave it to City of Sandy to try and help interpret when the application comes in.
I'm I'm good with it, but just, I'm just curious as how you're gonna enforce something like that.
Other thoughts?
No.
I think that we are ready to move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So motion passes unanimously. Yeah, you're welcome. So why don't we go ahead and plow through the rest of our business so we can get everybody out of here. There's no other business on our agenda other than approval of minutes. So at this point, would anyone like to move approval of those minutes?
I have not had a chance to read the minutes.
Okay, so why don't we do this? We'll get a schedule overview from the planning staff, and then we will approve the minutes when folks have had a chance to look them over.
I like that.
Quickly.
So I'll give you just a little update on recruitment for the planning commission. So 3 of you have terms expiring the end of April. That'd be Commissioner Wilson, Commissioner Peterson, and who am I forgetting? Commissioner Phillips. And I believe you've already applied. I've heard that rumor. In addition, as Chair Pasco mentioned earlier in the meeting, yes, Commissioner Grayson did submit her resignation recently. Her legislative duties have occupied a lot of her time. I think she was feeling like she just couldn't contribute to the level that she wanted to. She expressed her appreciation for the opportunity and how much she enjoyed the experience, but she'll be moving on. So we do need to now fill that partial term. The recruitment runs through the 15th. Is that right, Percy? I think it's to the 15th of March. So we'll look and see what we have in terms of other applicants and maybe decide to extend the recruitment a bit if there's not really a pool. Tentatively, we do have time reserved. 2 members of the Board of County Commissioners, Chair Pasco and I, have time on our calendars on April 9th, I believe, to do interviews. And so I would hope to actually keep that, that time. But we'll just kind of have to see, because if we don't have a pool to draw from for the opening, then I want to leave it open a little bit longer just to make sure. So that is the status of recruitment. And then schedule review. So as usual, things have been shifting. We've had a couple of changes, one being that the board is still in talks regarding short-term rentals. You'll recall that we did a study session, at which point we advised you that primarily regulations of short-term rentals were going to be in the county code and not be a zoning matter, but we will need to do, assuming that the board decides they do want to allow short-term rentals, we will want to do a minor amendment to the zoning code, basically just to specify explicitly that that use in a dwelling unit is permitted, but then the regulations would be happening through the county code rather than the zoning code. We had hoped to do that on March 23rd, but as I said, the board has not made a decision yet in terms of what they're going to do with the county code. We have another policy session this week, and so for now it's just off your agenda, but I would still anticipate that at some point later in the spring or summer we will be coming back with some kind of zoning code amendment for that, most likely. We will be, so then there's also been a change even since this schedule came out. The April 13th minor and time-sensitive amendments package has been pushed out 2 weeks, so that will happen on April 27th. The board is considering whether they want to repeal the rules of operation for marijuana retailers. You may recall that you've had testimony about that when we've adopted the work program a couple of times. Retailers requesting that we rely on the OLCC hours rather than having special hours. And the board is going to have that discussion tomorrow. And so we need to know whether we're including that proposal or not in the notification that goes out for ZDO 276. So April 27th is when we anticipate that hearing. So at this point, I can tell you for certain that your meeting on March 23rd is canceled. It's likely that your meeting on April 13th will be canceled, but I want to hold it just till I'm sure there's nothing we need a study session for. So we'll let you know as soon as we can. April 27th, yes, hold that for ZDO 276. And then at this point, that's all we've got that's actually complete. There is a comprehensive plan amendment and zone change to rural industrial that's been submitted, but at the moment the application is incomplete. And so we can't schedule it until we see how soon they get us the remaining information. So there will be something, a quasi-judicial hearing coming up on that, but I can't tell you yet exactly when that will occur. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions for Jennifer? Are we ready to approve the last meeting minutes?
Quick overview. I'll make a motion to approve the Planning Commission draft minutes of January 13th, 2020 as written.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Third.
Any discussion on the minutes, changes? Mary? You doing okay?
I just got there.
Are you ready to vote? All right. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. With that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Dave? Quick question.
Yeah.